Hey everyone, welcome back, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling something we all deal with, negative emotions.
Yeah, those tricky feelings, right?
Exactly. But get this, what if we could make them work for us instead of against us? That's what we're exploring today.
Sounds intriguing. I'm game if you are.
Absolutely. So we're talking anger, sadness, frustration, the whole shebang. And we've got some fascinating research to unpack.
All right, let's do it. Lay it on me.
Okay, so first up, anger. It gets a bad rap, right? Seen as this thing to avoid at all costs.
Oh, absolutely. Like, stuff it down, pretend it's not there.
But our sources suggest it's not that simple. They say anger is a totally natural response, like a heads up that something's not quite right.
Interesting. So it's like a built-in alarm system, signaling us to pay attention.
Exactly. And get this, when we look at it from a physiological standpoint, anger actually releases a burst of energy in the body.
Oh, wow. So it's like our body's gearing up, ready for action.
Exactly, like fight or flight mode, right?
Makes sense. Explains why we feel so, I don't know, amped up when we're angry. Totally.
Okay.
And that's why just pushing those feelings down can backfire.
Right, because that energy has to go somewhere.
Exactly. Our sources suggest finding a healthy outlet is key.
Okay, so how do we do that? What are some practical tips?
Well, one really simple technique they highlight is physical release. Like, imagine this, you have a super frustrating day at work, and you're just like fuming.
Ugh, I know that feeling all too well.
Right. Instead of letting it stew, you head out for a run or hit the gym. That physical activity actually helps process that anger energy.
So it's like literally moving that energy out of your system.
Precisely. You're not ignoring the anger, you're working through it.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see how that would be helpful.
And it's not just about blowing off steam physically. Expressing anger constructively is key too.
Okay, so less yelling at the barista who got your order wrong.
Ah,
Got it.
exactly. But seriously, our sources talk about the importance of clear, calm communication, even when you're feeling angry.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Oh, for sure. But that's where things like journaling can be super helpful. It's like a safe space to process those feelings without, accidentally exploding.
Right, like a pressure valve. I like that.
Exactly. And the source actually goes a step further, suggesting you get specific in those journal entries.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, they recommend really digging into the root of the anger. Like, what specifically triggered you? Was it something someone said, a situation? And then once you've identified that root, think about healthier ways you could respond next time.
So it's about understanding the why behind the anger.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Exactly. It's about using that anger as information to create positive change.
Okay, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I like that a lot.
Me too. It's like turning that negative energy into something productive. But, anger isn't the only emotion we grapple with. Sadness, that's another big one.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be so heavy.
Totally. And it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking we should just snap out of it or look on the bright side.
Right, like sadness is something to be avoided at all costs.
Exactly. But our research suggests that just pushing sadness away isn't the answer. In fact, it might actually make things worse in the long run.
Really? How so?
Well, our sources suggest that acknowledging and accepting our sadness is an important part of processing it. It's like giving ourselves permission to feel those feelings without judgment.
So it's okay to not be okay all the time.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sadness is a normal human emotion. And sometimes we just need to let ourselves feel it fully. That's where self-compassion comes in, which is something we talk about a lot on this show.
Self-compassion, yeah. That's huge. But it can be hard to actually put into practice. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But our deep dive today uncovered a really interesting perspective on this. It suggests that sadness often signals a need for healing.
Healing? Wow, I'd never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, it's like our sadness is a messenger telling us that something needs attention. It might be a past hurt, a current struggle, a need for change, whatever it is. That sadness is a sign that it's time to show ourselves some extra care and kindness.
That's such a powerful way to frame it. Instead of judging ourselves for feeling sad, we could approach it with curiosity and compassion. Like, hey, what is it that needs my attention right now?
Exactly. And our sources suggest that self-compassion is a crucial part of that healing journey. It's about treating ourselves with the same gentleness and understanding we'd offer to a close friend going through a tough time.
That's so important. We can be so hard on ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. But just like we wouldn't tell a friend to just get over it, we shouldn't say that to ourselves either. It's about recognizing that we deserve our own kindness, especially when we're hurting.
That's a good reminder. I think sometimes we forget that we need to be our own best friend. But what does that look like practically? How do we actually practice self-compassion when we're feeling down?
That's a great question, and thankfully, our deep dive today provided some really tangible techniques. One that stuck with me is actually pretty simple but profound, and it's all about finding those little sparks of joy, even amidst the sadness.
Oh, I like that. So it's not about pretending the sadness isn't there, but about also making space for those glimmers of hope and happiness.
Exactly. It's like acknowledging that we can experience a range of emotions at the same time. We can be sad and still appreciate a beautiful sunset, or find comfort in a warm cup of tea, or lose ourselves in a favorite song.
It's about holding space for both,
Yeah.
the sadness and the joy.
Yes. I love that. It's about recognizing that life isn't all or nothing. We can feel down and still find moments of peace, beauty, and connection. And sometimes those little sparks of joy can be enough to remind us that brighter days are still ahead.
Absolutely. It's like that flicker of light that helps us find our way through the darkness. It doesn't erase the darkness, but it gives us something to hold on to, something to guide us forward.
I love that analogy. It's like a beacon of hope, reminding us that we're not alone and that there's still beauty to be found even in the midst of sadness.
Exactly. And sometimes those little sparks of joy can even be the first step toward healing. But speaking of healing, I'm really curious to hear more about those self-compassion exercises you mentioned. What are some practical ways we can start incorporating this into our lives, like today?
I'm so glad you asked, because our research actually revealed some really interesting techniques for putting self-compassion into practice. One that really stood out to me is called self-compassionate letter writing.
Okay, I've heard of that. Tell me more about it.
So you basically write a letter to yourself, but like from the perspective of a super supportive friend, someone who's totally on your side no matter what.
I get it. Like channeling your own personal cheerleader.
Exactly. It's like tapping into that voice of kindness and understanding that we all need, especially when we're feeling down. And our source suggests that actually writing it down can be super powerful.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It's like making those kind words tangible,
Yeah.
giving them more weight.
Totally. And the source even gives some prompts to get you started. Like they suggest you start by asking yourself, what's the most compassionate way I can support myself through this right now?
That's a really good question to ask. I like that.
Me too. It's like shifting from self-criticism to self-support, which can be so huge when you're feeling down. But, there's this other technique they mentioned that I found really helpful for dealing with those really intense waves of sadness.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that one.
It's all about visualizing those feelings as waves, literally. Like imagine you're out in the ocean and this big wave of sadness comes crashing down on you.
Okay, I can picture it. Go on.
So instead of trying to fight the wave or pretend it's not there, this technique is about writing it out. You acknowledge the wave, you feel the intensity, but you also remember that waves always pass.
So it's about recognizing that sadness, like all emotions, is temporary, that it won't last forever.
Exactly. It's like remembering that even the stormiest seas eventually calm. And sometimes just holding on to that knowledge, that belief that this too shall pass, can be enough to get us through those really tough moments.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like giving ourselves permission to feel the sadness without letting it completely consume us.
Yeah.
Because it's not about denying the emotion, right? It's about acknowledging it, honoring it even, but also remembering that we are not our emotions.
Exactly. And I think that's such a powerful distinction to make, because when we can separate ourselves from our emotions, we gain a sense of perspective. It's like we're the captain of the ship, and those emotions, they're like the weather.
Okay, I like that analogy, because we can't always control the weather, right? Sometimes we're going to hit rough seas, but we can control how we navigate those conditions. We can adjust our sails, batten down the hatches, and ride out the storm.
Exactly. And I think that's such an empowering way to think about it. Because it means that even when we're feeling those really intense emotions, we still have a choice. We can choose how we respond, how we take care of ourselves, and ultimately how we move forward. And, speaking of moving forward, I think that transitions nicely into our next emotion, frustration. Because let's be real, we've all been there, right? Feeling stuck, annoyed, like things just aren't going our way.
Oh, tell me about it. Frustration is definitely up there on the list of not so fun feelings.
Right. But according to our research, frustration often pops up when things don't align with our expectations.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a disconnect between what we want and what's actually happening.
Exactly. It's that feeling you get when you're super pumped about something and then it totally falls apart. Or when you're working towards a goal and it feels like you're hitting roadblock after roadblock.
Ugh, yeah. Those roadblocks are the worst. They can make you want to just give up entirely.
Totally. And sometimes giving ourselves permission to take a break, to step away and regroup, can be super helpful. But our sources also suggest that shifting our perspective can be a game changer when it comes to dealing with frustration.
Oh, so how do we actually do that? How do we change our perspective when it feels like everything's going wrong?
Well, one technique they highlight is all about shifting from a focus on what's going wrong to what can I learn from this?
Interesting. So it's like reframing the situation as an opportunity for growth rather than a dead end.
Exactly. It's about looking for the lessons and the challenges. Like
Ah,
maybe that project fell through, but it taught you valuable time management skills. Or maybe that relationship didn't work out, but it helped you clarify what you're really looking for in a partner.
I see what you mean. It's about finding the silver lining, even when it feels like everything's going wrong.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even in those moments of frustration, there's always something to be gained, something to learn, something to help us grow.
That's a really empowering way to look at it. Because let's be honest, frustration can make you feel so powerless, like you're just stuck in this loop of negativity. But when you can shift your perspective, even just a little bit, and start looking for those opportunities for growth, it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And you know what else can be super helpful in those moments of frustration? Breaking the problem down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Like instead of focusing on the overwhelming big picture,
Mm.
you focus on just putting one foot in front of the other.
Precisely. Because often that feeling of frustration stems from feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, for sure. When you feel like you're drowning in to-dos, it's easy to spiral into frustration and overwhelm.
Exactly. And our sources suggest that by breaking down those big, daunting tasks into smaller, more actionable steps, we regain a sense of control.
It's like that saying, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
I love that. It's such a good analogy because when we focus on just taking that one bite, that one small step, it feels way less overwhelming. And as we start checking off those smaller steps, we build momentum and motivation.
Absolutely. It's amazing how those small wins can add up to big results. And I think that's a really important reminder for all of us, especially when we're feeling stuck or frustrated. Because sometimes the key to making progress isn't about making these huge, sweeping changes.
Right. It's about focusing on those small, consistent actions, those little steps forward that ultimately lead to big transformations. But as much as we try to control things, sometimes life throws us curveballs. Things happen that are totally out of our hands, and that can be incredibly frustrating in its own right.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where that concept of letting go comes in.
Letting go, yeah, that's a big one, and definitely easier said than done.
Oh, for sure. But our research suggests that a huge part of what causes frustration is that struggle to control things that are ultimately outside of our influence.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about recognizing what we can control and what we can't.
Exactly. And then focusing our energy on what we can actually influence.
So less time worrying about the weather and more time packing an umbrella.
Exactly. Because we can't control the weather, but we can control how prepared we are for it.
I like that. It's about focusing on what we can do, not what we can't. But how do we actually let go of that need to control everything?
Well, our sources suggest that it starts with awareness. Like really paying attention to those moments when we're clinging to control and asking ourselves, is this something I can realistically influence? Or am I just stressing myself out over something I have no power over?
So it's about choosing our battles wisely.
Exactly. And recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is surrender.
Surrender. That's an interesting way to put it.
It might sound counterintuitive, but think about it. When we surrender to the things we can't control, we free up so much mental and emotional energy. Energy that we can then redirect towards things we can actually impact.
It's like we're choosing to focus on our own lane in a race, right? We can't control how fast the other runners are going, but we can control our own pace, our own strategy.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, focusing on what we can control and letting go of the rest. It's not about giving up. It's about channeling our energy effectively and creating space for more peace of mind. And honestly, who couldn't use a little more of that?
Seriously. It's like we're trading in that illusion of control for a more grounded, accepting, and ultimately more peaceful approach to life. And, it's interesting how this whole conversation about managing negative emotions has really highlighted that it's not about erasing those emotions altogether, right? It's about learning to navigate them in a way that feels healthy and empowering.
Right. It's about recognizing that all emotions, even the ones we might label as negative, serve a purpose. They're giving us information. They're trying to tell us something. And when we can approach them with curiosity and compassion, we can actually learn and grow from them. But, there's a lot more to unpack here, and we're running out of time in this segment.
Yeah, and you know what it's like? We're not trying to become emotionless,
certainly.
right? It's more like we're becoming more emotionally intelligent, I guess.
That's a great way to put it. Emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Being able to understand and manage our emotions, even the tough ones. It's a game changer for sure.
It totally is, because when we can recognize those patterns, like, okay, this is what happens when I get stressed, or this is how I tend to react in this kind of situation, that's when we can start to make different choices.
Exactly. It's like we become scientists of our own emotions. We observe, we learn, and we use that knowledge to make more conscious decisions.
I love that. Becoming emotional scientists. And the more we practice, the better we get at navigating those emotional waters.
Absolutely. It's like building a muscle. The more we work it, the stronger it gets. And the more skilled we become at responding to challenges in a way that feels aligned with our values and goals.
Okay, so we've talked about anger, sadness, and frustration. What a roller coaster. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that these aren't just negative emotions to be avoided, right?
They're not the enemy. They're actually messengers. They're trying to tell us something important about ourselves, about our needs, about our boundaries.
Exactly. And when we learn to listen to those messages with curiosity and compassion instead of judgment, that's where the real magic happens.
100%.
Okay.
Because it's in those moments of self-compassion and understanding that we create space for real growth and transformation.
So well said. And, I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present with those emotions, learning from them, and using them as fuel for growth.
I love that. Because ultimately, it's about creating a more fulfilling and joyful life, even with all the ups and downs that come with being human.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been such a great conversation. So much to think about.
I agree. And, I'm really curious to hear what our listeners took away from this deep dive. What resonated with them? What are they going to put into practice?
Me too. Because ultimately, the real work happens out there in the real world. So to all our listeners, as you navigate your own emotional landscapes, remember to be kind to yourselves, be curious, and don't be afraid to feel those feelings fully. Because even in the midst of the storm, there's always strength, resilience, and even a little bit of magic to be found. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep growing, and as always, thanks for joining us on this Dub Dive.